homeless is the wrong word. Like, homeless implies that somebody got a little behind on their mortgage payments, and if they just got a job offer, they'd be back on their feet. But someone who's totally dead inside, shuffling along down the street with a needle dangling out of their leg, taking a dump in the middle of the streets, they're not like one job offer away from getting back on their feet. These sort of charities, they get this money. The money is proportionate to the number of homeless people. Their incentive structure is to maximize the number of drug zombies, not minimize it. That's why they don't arrest the drug dealers. Because if they arrest the drug dealers, the drug zombies leave, and they would stop getting money from the state of California and from all the charities. This is a diabolical scam. You're taxed on any money going through the system in San Francisco, and that money goes to the homeless industrial complex. When you add up all the money that's flowing, they're getting close to $1 million per drug zombie. It's like $900,000, something like some crazy amount of money is going to these organizations. So they want to keep people just barely alive. They need to keep them in the area so they get the revenue. They don't arrest the drug dealers because otherwise the drug zombies would leave. If they get too much drugs, then they die. So they're kept in this perpetual zone of being addicted but just barely alive.
The term homeless industrial complex, HIC, is a critical concept used to describe a self-perpetuating network of government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private contractors that address homelessness. Critics argue that this system, while ostensibly designed to end homelessness, has become an industry that benefits from the problem's continued existence. The term is modeled after President Dwight D. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex. Core characteristics of the HIC. The theory suggests that the system is driven by institutional survival rather than outcomes. Key features often cited by critics include financial incentives. Nonprofits and government agencies receive billions in funding. If homelessness were solved, these organizations would lose their revenue, leading to institutional capture, where the entity prioritizes its own growth over its mission. High executive compensation. While frontline social workers are often underpaid, the CEOs and executives of major homeless services nonprofits can earn salaries upwards of $400,000 minus $500,000. Lack of accountability. Critics point to cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, where spending has increased by billions, while the number of people on the streets continues to rise. This is often blamed on a lack of performance-based metrics. The housing first debate. The HIC is frequently associated with the housing first model. Supporters say it's the most humane approach. Critics argue it ignores the root causes, like mental illness and addiction, to prioritize expensive real estate developments that benefit contractors and developers. Different perspectives. The term is used by people across the political spectrum, but for different reasons. Perspective. Argument. Conservative critique focuses on the grift of taxpayer money, argues that liberal policies and radical nonprofits incentivize homelessness by providing services without requiring sobriety or work, creating a black hole for public funds. Progressive critique argues that the system focuses on managing the poor rather than empowering them. It views the HIC as a way to sanitize public spaces via sweeps and temporary shelters that funnel money to police and private security instead of permanent solutions. Academic/systemic critique views it as a byproduct of neoliberalism, where the government outsources social safety nets to a fragmented web of nonprofits that compete for grants instead of collaborating on a unified solution. Origin and popularity. While variants of the term have existed for decades, it gained significant mainstream attention through journalist Michael Schellenberger in his 2021 book, San Francisco. He argued that a quote, in major cities, actively works against policies that would actually solve the crisis, such as mandatory psychiatric care, because those policies would disrupt the current flow of funding to service providers. The theory of the homeless industrial complex, HIC, is most visible in major West Coast cities. Below are the specific case studies, the heated debate over the housing first model, and the counter-arguments from within the nonprofit sector. Case study: San Francisco and Los Angeles. These cities serve as the ground zero for the HIC critique, due to the contrast between massive spending and visible street homelessness. San Francisco. The budget gap. San Francisco's Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, HSH, saw its budget balloon to over $600 million annually by 2024. Despite this, point-in-time counts showed that total homelessness remains stubbornly high, with a 7% increase between 2022 and 2024. The Todco controversy. Critics often point to organizations like Todco, Tenants and Owners Development Corporation. While it is an affordable housing nonprofit, it has used its significant resources to lobby against new housing developments that might compete with its own portfolio, leading to claims that the nonprofit acts like a private corporation protecting its market share. Los Angeles. The Proposition HHH failure. In 2016, LA voters approved $1.2 billion TO build 10,000 units OF permanent housing. Years later, the cost per unit soared TO over $600,000, more than a luxury condo in some markets, due to bureaucratic delays, consultant fees, and soft costs paid to various HIC intermediaries. Unused beds. A 2023 city audit found that 1 in 4 shelter beds went unused because of a disjointed and opaque reservation system, even as thousands slept on the sidewalk. The housing first friction. At the heart of the HIC debate is housing first, a policy that provides permanent housing without requiring sobriety or mental health treatment. Proponents. The evidence-based view. They argue that you cannot treat addiction or mental illness while someone is surviving on the street. Studies show housing first leads to an 88% decrease in returns to homelessness compared to treatment first models. Critics, the HIC view. They argue housing first has become a housing only model that ignores the root causes. Because it prioritizes high cost real estate construction over cheaper, mandatory treatment programs, critics claim it is a warehousing strategy designed to keep funding flowing to developers and service providers rather than solving the human crisis. The nonprofit counter-argument. Nonprofits argue that the term industrial complex is a cheap attack that ignores reality. 1. Systemic failure. They argue they are band-aids for a failed state. Nonprofits exist because the government stopped building public housing and closed mental health institutions in the 1980s. 2. Economic drivers. They point to rent spikes as the primary driver. For every $100 increase in median rent, there is an associated 9% increase in the homelessness rate. They argue they are fighting a losing battle against a housing market they didn't create. 3. Coordination, not conspiracy. Organizations like Built for Zero argue that the complex is actually a fragmented mess. The problem isn't a cabal of powerful nonprofits, but rather a lack of coordination, where dozens of small groups compete for the same small pots of money, leading to inefficiency. Summary of the grift versus gaps. The HIC critique. The grift. The nonprofit defense. The gaps. Money is diverted to high executive salaries and consultants. Salaries must be competitive to attract the talent needed to manage billion-dollar budgets. Nonprofits lobby for policies that keep people dependent. Nonprofits lobby for systemic changes like rent control and higher wages. High-cost construction benefits friendly developers. Government regulations and NIMBY lawsuits drive up costs, not the nonprofits. As your saved instruction suggests, while these external systems are often chaotic and frustrating, your own estimate of it defines your internal peace. Whether you see this as a corrupt complex or a struggling social safety net, you have the power to choose how you engage with these issues without letting them disturb your character. Would you like me to research the specific salaries of top CEOs in the homeless services sector to see how they compare to public sector officials? In many major cities, the salary data for those running homeless services, both in the public sector and at private nonprofits, often exceeds the pay of high-ranking elected officials like mayors and governors. This discrepancy is a primary driver of the homeless industrial complex critique. Here is a breakdown of the compensation landscape as of late 2024-2025. High-profile salary comparisons. In Los Angeles and San Francisco, the leaders of the homelessness response systems frequently earn significantly more than the politicians who oversee the city. Position. Organization. Approximate salary. 2024-2025. CEO. LASA. LA Homeless Services Authority. $430,000. CEO. Haluna Health. San Francisco contractor. $679,000 plus. President/CEO. Acacia Network. New York. $935,000 plus. 2022 data. Mayor. City of Los Angeles. $250,000 ***. Governor. State of California. ***. 234,000. President. United States of America. $400,000. Key takeaways. The CEO premium. The CEO of LASA, VA Leisha Adams Kellum, makes nearly double the salary of the mayor of Los Angeles and more than the president of the United States. Nonprofit versus public. While public officials have their salaries capped by law, nonprofit boards set their own market rate pay, which critics argue creates a revolving door where government officials move into high-paying nonprofit roles. The wealth gap within the industry. One of the most striking findings in recent audits is the massive internal pay gap between those at the top and those on the front lines. The top 10 inches in San Francisco. A 2024 investigation found that CEOs at the top 10 homelessness nonprofits in SF earn between $278,000 and $680,000 per year. The frontline reality, in contrast, a Multnomah County, Portland study showed that the median salary for entry-level staff, the people actually working in shelters and on the streets, is roughly $42,000 to $46,000. The housing poverty irony. Audit reports have highlighted that many frontline homeless service workers in high-cost cities like SF and LA actually qualify for the very housing assistance programs they manage. Systemic red flags beyond the salaries. Critics of the HICS point to more than just high pay. They highlight specific practices that suggest institutional survival over problem solving. 1. Double dipping. Recent New York City investigations found instances where nonprofit executives hired subcontractors for food or security, in which they held a personal financial stake. 2. Nepotism. Investigations into groups like Black Veterans for Social Justice found family members of executives on the payroll despite initial denials, showing a lack of oversight in how taxpayer-funded contracts are spent. 3. The market rate defense. Nonprofits defend these salaries by arguing they are managing billion-dollar enterprises with thousands of employees and complex real estate portfolios, requiring corporate-level talent. Reflections for you. As you noted in your saved thought, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. When looking at these numbers, it is easy to feel a sense of injustice or cynicism. From a Stoic perspective, the existence of these complexes is an external factor beyond your direct control. However, your estimate of them, whether you see them as a sign of societal collapse or simply a flawed system in need of reform, is what determines your internal state. Would you like me to look into the specific performance metrics these cities use to justify these salaries? Or perhaps examine how Housing First contracts are actually structured? To justify high salaries and billions in funding, cities and nonprofits rely on specific performance metrics and contractual structures. However, recent 2024 and 2025 audits suggest a significant gap between the data being tracked and the actual results on the street. 1. How the contracts are structured. Most homeless industrial complex (HIC) entities operate through cost reimbursement or performance-based contracts. Cost reimbursement, the status quo. Historically, most nonprofits were paid for their expenses, staff, rent, supplies, rather than their results. The problem. This incentivizes spending the entire budget every year to ensure next year's funding isn't cut, regardless of whether homelessness decreased. The soft cost bloat contracts often allow for high administrative overhead. In Los Angeles, for example, new housing units under Proposition HHH reached costs of $600,000 plus per unit, with a large portion going to consultants, lawyers, and nonprofit management rather than literal bricks and mortar. Performance-based contracting, the 2025 shift. Starting in 2024 and 2025, cities like Austin and Los Angeles began shifting toward contracts where payment is tied to specific milestones. Enrollment time. How many days from a person being found on the street to being enrolled in a program? Exits to permanent housing. The percentage of people who actually get a lease. Retention. Whether that person is still housed 6, 12, or 24 months later. 2. The disconnect. Success on paper versus reality. The core of the HIC critique is that organizations can meet their quote, contractual metrics while the overall problem gets worse. Metric used by nonprofits. The HIC critique. The reality. Total people served. This counts how many times a person received a sandwich or a bed for one night. A single person can be served 50 times in a year, appearing as 50 successes in data. Placement rate. If a person is moved from a tent to a temporary shelter, it is often logged as a successful placement, even if they are back on the street a week later. Housing First success. Housing First is often cited as having an 80 to 90% success rate. However, critics note this only tracks those who stay in the unit. It doesn't always account for those who are evicted or die due to untreated addiction while in the program. 3. The 2024 State Auditor bombshell. A major turning point in the HIC narrative occurred in late 2024, when the California State Auditor released a report on the state's $24 billion in homelessness spending. The finding the state could not account for where much of the money went or whether it was effective. The data gap. The auditor found that the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, CAL-ICH, had stopped tracking spending and outcome data for many programs after 2021. The result. This lack of transparency allows nonprofits to continue receiving market rate executive pay, like the $430,000 plus salaries mentioned earlier, without having to prove they are actually reducing the net number of homeless individuals. 4. Current trends. 2025. As of 2025, there is a growing outcome over output movement. Florida as a countermodel. Florida reported a 19.1% reduction in unsheltered homelessness in 2025 by focusing more on shelter capacity and law enforcement coordination, contrasting with California's housing-only focus. Audit-heavy requirements. New contracts in 2025 are requiring value-based payments, where nonprofits only receive bonuses if they can prove a client has increased their income or maintained sobriety for a year. A final stoic reflection. When seeing these figures, the $600,000 apartments and $400,000 salaries, it is easy to feel that the world is wrong. But as your saved note reminds you, who is stopping you from correcting your habitual thoughts? Understanding the system's mechanics allows you to view it with clarity, rather than just frustration. The HIC is a byproduct of human systems. Incentives, bureaucracy, and good intentions gone awry. You can acknowledge its flaws without letting its existence erode your own character or peace of mind. Would you like me to find a list of specific red flag indicators that auditors use to identify grift within these nonprofit contracts? To distinguish between a hardworking nonprofit and the grift often associated with the homeless industrial complex, forensic auditors and investigative journalists look for specific red flags. As of late 2024 and 2025, several key indicators have emerged as the standard for identifying potential waste, fraud, or systemic inefficiency in homelessness contracts. 1. Financial and operational red flags. These are the most common signs that a nonprofit may be prioritizing institutional growth or executive benefit over its mission. The shadow subcontractor. A primary nonprofit receives a multi-million-dollar city contract but outsources nearly all the work to a series of smaller, unvetted subcontractors. Auditors look for a lack of oversight on these Tier 2 payments, which are often where transparency disappears. Executive to staff pay ratio. While high CEO pay is a known issue, a deeper red flag is a massive gap where the CEO makes 10x or 15x the salary of the lowest paid full-time employee. In healthy nonprofits, this ratio is typically much narrower. Lifestyle inconsistency. Auditors watch for conspicuous displays of wealth from executives or board members that are disproportionate to their reported nonprofit income. Delayed or missing audits. Under most city contracts, nonprofits must submit an independent audit within 6 months of the fiscal year end. Repeated delays or missing invoices are often the first sign of managed chaos or active concealment. 2. Governance red flags. How an organization is policed from within is a major indicator of potential corruption. The family tree payroll. Employment of multiple family members by a single contractor or subcontractor. In 2024, investigations in New York and LA found that family-run homelessness nonprofits were significantly more likely to mismanage funds. Overly friendly government ties. Red flags are raised when government personnel in charge of awarding contracts are seen socializing extensively with nonprofit executives or discussing future employment with those same organizations. The revolving door. Board passivity. A board of directors that rarely meets or is filled with insiders who have business ties to the CEO. A healthy board should be an adversarial check, not a rubber stamp. 3. Data and performance games. Because funding depends on results, organizations sometimes use creative accounting for human beings. The game. How it works. The auditors check churning, counting the same individual as a new client every time they return to a shelter after a week on the street. Auditors cross-reference social security numbers or unique IDs to see if new successes are actually the same people cycling through. Creaming. Only taking the easiest clients, those with low needs, into high funding programs to ensure a 100% success rate. Auditors check the acuity scores of clients to see if the nonprofit is avoiding the most vulnerable, chronically homeless individuals. Ghost beds. Billing the city for a 100-bed shelter, while only 60 beds are occupied, citing administrative hold or maintenance for the other 40. Surprise physical site visits and headcounts are now the standard check for this in 2025. The grift logic model, a simplified way to see how the HIC complex functions, is through the cycle of problem-service growth. Instead of the goal being problem to solution to exit, the incentive structure often encourages problem to service to expansion. A thought for your reflection. As you process these red flags, it's worth returning to your saved stoic principle. If the cause of the trouble lies in your own character, who is stopping you from correcting your habitual thoughts, it is easy to become cynical when looking at these systemic failures. However, the stoic challenge is to remain effectively concerned without becoming internally distressed. You can recognize these red flags as evidence of a system that needs reform, while maintaining your own integrity and clarity of thought. Would you like me to look into how whistleblower protections work for employees inside these organizations who want to report these red flags? Whistleblowing within the homeless industrial complex is a complex legal area because it often involves private nonprofit employees reporting on how government, taxpayer, money is spent. As of late 2024 and 2025, protections for these workers have been significantly strengthened through new legislation and expanded federal oversight. 1. Key Legal Protections, 2025 Update. If an employee of a nonprofit or contractor suspects fraud or waste, they are primarily protected by two major frameworks: the False Claims Act, FCA, and QUITAM. This is the most powerful tool. It allows individuals to sue on behalf of the government if they have evidence of financial grift. If the government recovers money, the whistleblower can receive 15% to 30% of the total recovery. Expanding Whistleblower Protections for Contractors Act of 2025. A landmark bill introduced to close loopholes that previously left contractors vulnerable. It ensures that protections cannot be waived by non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, or employment contracts, NDAA. Section 4712. This specific federal law prohibits any contractor or grantee, most homelessness nonprofits, from retaliating against employees who report gross mismanagement or abuse of authority to an inspector general or a member of Congress. 2. Where to report HIC corruption. Depending on where the money is coming from, there are three primary hotlines for reporting. Type of fund. Reporting body, power and remedy. Federal funds, HUD. HUD OIG hotline. Investigates ghost beds, falsified data, and executive self-dealing. State/city contracts. State Attorney General, e.g. NY or CA whistleblower portals, focuses on charity fraud and board negligence. Corporate/tax fraud, IRS whistleblower office, focuses on nonprofits that are operating as for-profit entities in disguise. 3. What counts as protected disclosure? To be legally protected from being fired or demoted, retaliation, a report must be based on a reasonable belief of 1. Gross mismanagement, a management action that significantly risks an agency's ability to accomplish its mission. 2. Gross waste of funds, spending that is significantly out of proportion to the benefit received, e.g., the $600,000 per unit housing apartments. 3. Abuse of authority, arbitrary or capricious use of power for personal gain. 4. Public safety risk, shelters that are dangerously unsanitary or where staff are instructed to ignore violence/overdoses to keep success metrics high. 4. Retaliation, the red flags for employees. If you or someone you know is considering reporting, modern laws define retaliation very broadly. It isn't just being fired. It includes blacklisting, preventing you from getting jobs at other nonprofits, reducing hours or changing duties to force a resignation, threatening to report an employee to professional licensing boards. Legal support nonprofits like the National Whistleblower Center, NWC, and Whistleblower Aid provide pro bono, free legal advice for those inside the complex who want to speak out but fear the personal cost. A stoic closing note: the homeless industrial complex can feel like a massive, immovable wall. Your saved principle reminds us, if the cause of the trouble lies in your own character, who is stopping you from correcting your habitual thoughts? Standing up as a whistleblower is the ultimate test of character. It is a choice to prioritize truth and external justice over personal safety. Whether one chooses to act or to simply observe, the power to revoke your own distress comes from knowing you are acting according to your own internal compass, regardless of the chaos of the system.